Hmm? No sound. Raika, there's no sound. Raika, there's no sound. Raika, you want to play it again, or let's give it a start? Yeah. Hello and welcome to our spotlight session, the GDTA spotlight session in February 2026. And I'm really delighted to have so many guests from all around the world. We have 121 people now in the call, which is a new record, I think, from all around the world. I'm really happy, and it's actually a true honor to welcome Agnes Kwek to our today's GDTA Spotlight. The GDTA Spotlight, the Global Design Thinking Alliance, is a community of academic institutions. We are about 46 institutions in 26 countries. We are since 2017. We are a growing community, and every month we do an online session. And today I'm really very honored to welcome Agnes Kwek. She is an internationally recognized leader in public sector innovation and also design for systems transformation. And she served as a design ambassador for Singapore, representing Singapore's design ecosystem also globally and strengthening the international collaboration across Europe, North America, and Asia. And Agnes was executive director of the Design Singapore Council, where she led national design strategy and helped implement Singapore's Design 2030 master plan, embedding design as a strategic capability across government, business, and education. And to be honest, I don't know of any other country in the world being so clearly dedicated to design thinking and systemic change as Singapore is. And Agnes has a big stake in that. And she began her career in Singapore's administrative service, spending 20 years across key ministries, including defense, labor, social welfare, and transport. And she pioneered the introduction of design thinking within the government, helping to establish Singapore's in-house public sector design lab. It's one of the first ones probably in the world, and advancing citizen-centered approaches to policy and service innovation. And in 2013, she completed a year-long immersive at ideate in San Francisco. Today, she is working as a founder and CEO of Mind the System. She works globally with governments and organizations, also still with Singapore, and she will talk about that, hopefully. She's working on systems thinking, future capabilities, and leadership in complexity. She holds an honors degree in politics from University in Oxford, in politics, philosophy, and economy. And from the University of Chicago, she got a master's degree in international relations. So a background that is beautifully reflecting the intersections of policies, systems, and design, which is characterizing her work. And we got in touch first 2021, when Agnes was giving a keynote at our GDTA yearly conference. At that time, it was digital because there was pandemic. And Agnes, I'm really happy that you are telling us something today about your work, and you are a little bit kind of pushy because you are saying design thinking, it's not enough. We need more. So I'm really thrilled to have you here, Agnes. You are living in Paris now, and you are live here together with us. And please give a big hand of applause to welcome Agnes Kwek. We're very happy to have you. And the stage is yours.
Thank you, Yuli, for the wonderful introduction. And it's such an honor to have everyone from so many places in the world. Thank you for tuning in, whether it's your lunchtime or dinner time, to spend the next hour with me. So I have a quick presentation that I'll try to keep under half an hour because what I really like to do is to engage in a conversation with all of you. So as my presentation is design thinking is not enough, Yuli said lots of nice things about how Singapore uses design to drive innovation. But I'm actually here to tell you what didn't work and why and what I learned from it. So hopefully you don't have to repeat my mistakes. Okay. So here are principles for designing in complexity. And out of the 20 years that I was serving in the Singapore government, about over a decade of that was defined by design thinking. And in particular, three areas. We used design thinking to drive public service transformation. And I built the first in-house design thinking lab in the Prime Minister's office. Singapore is not the first country to have this in-house design lab. That honor goes to Denmark and the UK, I believe. Yeah. So Christian Basin took the top spot. But we are very good friends and we talk about this quite a lot. We used design thinking to drive commuter-centric land transport, really using it to drive infrastructural planning, service delivery, and also organizational culture. And here is the first MRT station that's built by design thinking. MRT is how we call the tube or the metro in Singapore. And as executive director in Design Singapore Council, we led design innovation in the economy. Some of the things that we did was to set up the first national design thinking educational framework that governed all the design standards for all schools. And then in 2018, when I moved to Paris for personal reasons, the job title of Singapore Design Ambassador came along with me. At one point, the statistics that you see below was the breadth of the kind of stakeholder engagement that we had to do in order to drive all these changes. So 66 agencies, 154 civil servants, 120 senior leaders, permanent secretaries and deputy secretaries, ministers, of course, all the design schools and industry associations in Singapore, as well as international partners. Across all of this, let me just tell you off the bat, I've had more failures than successes. So if you're expecting a wonderful success story, not so many of those. But through the failures, I have learned the answer to the question that actually frustrates designers the most. And these I get from young designers all the time, which is this. Such a good idea. Why won't they implement it? And this just really frustrates us, right? We have done all our research, user research. We have talked to hundreds of people. We've come up with great double diamond ideas. And we've done prototyping. We've shown it works. Why won't they, whoever they are, implement it? And so let me translate these phrases for you if you've heard them before. And I'm sure many of these sound familiar. It's a great idea, but maybe next time. Means it's not a great idea. We simply don't have the bandwidth right now. Means please don't bother us. I'm fully supportive, but my team is not. It means I'm not supportive. But if we do this, then there's going to be some problem. You're missing the fuller picture. Stupid. So if you heard any of this before, it sounds familiar, and I would love to see your own in the chat. You need to know when and why design thinking fails and what to do about this. So as a quick background, when I left the service in 2018 and started my own company in 2021, I didn't know what I could or wanted to do after 20 years of public sector. The one thing I asked myself is, what did I learn, right? I learned what didn't work. So the founding of my company, Mind the System, is really to help people navigate these changes and transformation so that they don't make the same mistakes that I do. So that's what I mainly do today. I do senior executive training and teaching, and I consult with companies. So as Yuli mentioned, first let's go back to my time in IDEO San Francisco. And I took a year out of government on attachment to IDEO because I really wanted to learn how to be a designer and not just a client. Prior to that, I had been working with IDEO Singapore, embedding design thinking projects all across government for public sector transformation. But I thought, okay, time to get my own hands dirty. So that year was the fantastic year of my life, right? As you might imagine, this is Silicon Valley, and I was involved in 3 projects, including 6 months embedded in Google. So coming back from fresh, full of ideas, fresh energy, and was brought back to the Singapore government to embed these new approaches in the public sector. Then I was sent upon returning to be the Chief Transformation Officer at Land Transport Authority, LTA. And this is what was happening at that time, right? I was brought in to put design thinking into the organization to transform it to be a commuter-centric organization. But at the same time, it coincided with massive disruptions in our train system. And this was the first time it ever happened on this scale in Singapore. And if you know Singaporeans and you've been to Singapore, you know that we're not very tolerant of failures, especially when it disturbs efficiency, effectiveness. And this was a big deal. I live now in Paris, and when this happens, the French are like, oh, so, and everyone just gets on about their day, right? But it's really not like that. Like politicians have been brought down because the trains didn't work. This is the kind of level and standards that we're expecting from the public service. So, coming in from Silicon Valley, where design thinking is really embraced, and I was brought into this situation 8 months into the job, I wanted to quit. I was so desperate to get out of there. And why? Nothing was happening. There was no progress. Doors were getting slammed in my face whenever I talked about design thinking. All those 4 phrases that you've seen before, I've heard them all, and they were used over and over again. I was getting really demoralized, demotivated, and then I started blaming the organization and all the management in it. In my head, I was saying, this is a terrible culture. The management don't understand. They're such dinosaurs. They're just really not seeing the future. All these thoughts were in my head. And I was on the verge of giving up. I had learned then that actually design thinking fails in complex systems. And this is my key takeaway from that time. Where the focus on end user masks deeper complexities. And what are these complexities that we're talking about? 3 things in particular: nonlinearity, interdependencies, and human psychology, which is the psychology of the stakeholders and as well that of yours. And I'll go into each of these 3 in a little bit more detail. But first, I want to show this quote. So the late Stephen Hawking at the turn of the century said, I think the next century, he's talking about this century, will be the century of complexity. And I don't need to go into that in greater detail with AI, climate change, loss of trust in public institutions, demographic change. We are feeling that deeply now. So here's a question. Why are we so bad at complexity? And in order to show you this, I'm going to do a little demonstration right now. So just bear with me while I toggle around. Okay. Can you see these 3 vessels? All right, great. I love those emojis coming up. Keep going at it. Now, in order from smallest to biggest, I'm going to ask you this question. For which of these cups is the circumference bigger than the height? So this more than this, okay? So when I point to the vessel, just give me a thumbs up emoji if you think that the circumference is longer than the height. This one, who says this one is? Okay, thank you. So I think most of you would say this circumference is taller than the height. What about this? The circumference is more than the height. Most of you would say that. What about this one? And for argumentation purposes, we'll just take the bottom. What about this one? A few. Okay, so minority. So most of you say this, some of you say this, and very few of you say this. And now I have a measure tape. And I swear to you, it's not rigged, it's actually a proper tape. This measures 16 centimeters at the bottom. And here's how it compares to the height. So you're correct. So well done, all of you. Now let's look at the middle where some of you said, the bottom circumference here is 22.5 centimeters. Let's say 22 centimeters for sake of argument. It's way more than the height. All right, now let's go to the final one. Most of you said that the circumference is not more than the height. The measurement here is 21.5 centimeters at the bottom. It is still way more than the height. So from this little experiment, what does it actually show us? It shows us that the human mind is naturally very, very bad at seeing curves. We're much better at seeing straight lines, but curves are really difficult for us to intuitively understand. And so what has this got to do with complexity? The world is not a linear place by far, right? We're talking about two kinds of curves. One could be about exponential change and acceleration. So over here is that's the great acceleration of the Anthropocene era. And these little lines that you see here maps everything from, say, primary energy use to release of gases into the atmosphere, fisheries exploited, floods, and also things like tourism or McDonald's restaurants. And you can see that it's stayed pretty steady for about 200 years, except after World War II in 1950, suddenly it exploded. But if you think about how many of our systems today are still based in the Industrial Revolution age, then you think, are we really keeping up with the changes in the world? And this curve is going to get even more exponential with AI. But the other kind of curve is also true. For those of you who are students of economics, in week 2 of high school economics, you would have learned about the diminishing marginal utility curve, right? And that means that you can keep putting effort into something, but up to a certain point in time, it will have this experience of falling off the cliff. What this means is also that it's also a dynamic minimums, which means that your law of the minimum is constraining the system. Your system is constrained by the weakest link, not by its strongest factor. And that weakest link is also changing all the time. So this could apply to things like GDP growth, family money, academia. Nonlinearity also applies in complex boundaries, whether it's about complex supply chains for companies and corporations, or wicked problems like poverty, income inequality, right? And designers must solve the boundary issues. But then again, these kind of complex dependencies are very difficult for the human mind to see in this kind of form. And finally, human psychology. Humans are just inherently bad at holding competing beliefs in their heads, right? Whereas complex problems require us to recognize that competing goals are equally valid while managing the flow between them. So it's not about choosing whether one goal is better than the other, but how we flow between those two goals at any one point in time or even across times. So you can see just like some examples of competing goals there: sustainability versus growth, user experience versus operational viability. It shouldn't be a versus, it should be an and. So how do we make this an and? So in short, designers, I feel, need systems thinking. And systems thinking is about understanding and unpacking complex problems holistically by really focusing on the interconnectedness of a system's parts rather than its individual components. So in my journey into understanding why I failed, then I started reading more into systems thinking. At one point, I was really overwhelmed. If you search, there could be up to 75 different tools for systems thinking, including mapping, feedback loops, causal layer analysis, so on and so forth. It was just starting to feel really unwieldy and impossible to wrap my head around. So I went back to basics. What did I really wish I had known before I started my design thinking transformation journey? And then narrowing it down to those first principles, and then reverse engineering into finding the frameworks and research that actually back this up. So ever since then, I have been teaching 3 principles of systems thinking. And my takeaway is this: like, if you don't remember anything else that I say to you at the end of today, at least remember these 3. So let's go into them. And I always start with a bathtub challenge, and I ask, my participants in the workshop 3 questions. The first question is, name as many different components of this system as you can think of, right? Components represents a system. The simplest system, that a very simple system, very evident, very tangible. And course, people will say, oh, the tap itself, the faucet, the drainage, the legs, the brand. Then I ask them, list as many functions of the system as you can think of. And at first, the obvious answers come in: bathing, washing kids, washing dogs. And as I press them to think really out of the box, answers like, oh, it's to store water, to wash clothes, earthquake shelter, or hydroponic system, murder scene. I'm like, great, love those answers. Then let's go back to the first question. Now list new components of this system that you haven't given me before. Answers will come in like, oh, plants or pets, a knife, body bag, right? If it's a murder scene, indeed. And my tip to them was, what have we learned by all of this? Number one, all of us can be looking at exactly the same system, but having a really different idea of how to use it. And number two, depending on the functions of which you listed for the system, how you build it actually changes. So the first principle is purpose drives a system. Everyone sees the stock differently. And when I say stock, I mean what's actually in the bathtub, right? Depending on the function. And if we as designers define stock as a great user experience, different people are looking at the system, but thinking about the stock completely different from that. So what do we do about this? A system transformation must first start with a purpose, and the purpose must be strong in order for it to carry weight. It must be pragmatic, existential, and bold. And this is an example from Singapore about our garden city vision in 1965. And the guy that you see with a shovel over there, that's our first Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, was also known as the chief gardener of Singapore. When she introduced this vision, to give you some context, our country was independent in 1965, so this is only 2 years after. We were struggling with defense issues, water scarcity, a largely uneducated immigrant population living in slums. We had no economy to speak of. So why on earth, only 2 years after our independence, would he want a garden city? And I can assure you that there was a lot of debate in cabinet saying, is this really the right time to be thinking about planting trees? But his argument was this: Singapore had to differentiate itself from the region. By having a sustainable living environment, we would attract talent. By attracting talent, we would attract foreign investments. With foreign investments, our economy would grow, our reserves would grow, then we have a buffer for defense. And that's how he closed the loop all the way back to humble trees. So as a result, 3 years later, 55,000 trees were planted. Today, 46% of our land is covered by greenery. And when I say land, it's not just ground land, it's also our rooftops and vertical surfaces. And we are consistently voted the most sustainable city in Asia. If we had come from a standpoint that trees are nice and people like trees, that's not going to fly. But he made the link all the way back to security and defense. So this was highly pragmatic, highly existential purpose. Another example, when I was a Singapore design ambassador, I would often get asked this question: what is your favorite example of Singapore design? And they're expecting some clothes brand, furniture. My answer is my tax system. My tax system is so easy to use that most of Singaporeans don't even file taxes on an annual basis. It is all seamless pull through. And this was a result of a paradigm redefined when in 1991, our tax authority was set up as a statutory board. Its founding chairman, I believe that most people want to pay their taxes, thereby redefining the purpose of Singapore's tax authority. Most tax authorities in the world treat people as criminals, right? And hence, taxation systems are out to catch tax defrauders. But he turned around and said, I believe that actually people don't want to get on the wrong side of tax authorities. It's just not worth the trouble. So how do we make it as seamless and as easy for people to file their taxes correctly so they don't get on the wrong side of the tax authority? And their purpose is actually now to minimize interactions with IRAS. No service is good service. And from there, it actually unfurl a whole 2 decades or more of systems transformation, all the way from phone filing to, this is really important, in 1997, auto inclusion of employment income. In other words, all the employers in Singapore automatically submit and push their employees' income information to the tax authorities, such that it's all captured in one place. As an employee, I don't ever have to put in my personal income. It's already all there. Today, it's as simple as a one click or no click, right? You will get a message from the tax authority saying, if nothing has changed in your situation, then you don't even need to file. We've got all your information. You just receive an income statement from us. I love it. I will never ever be a tax resident from any other country, except now I have to be in France. And I can assure you it's a very different experience. All right, moving on. What's the second thing that designers or anyone working in complexity needs to recognize? That actually design is not needed to solve all kinds of problems. And here's a question that I get very often from Cs or companies asking me, do I use design for everything? The answer is no. And because there are actually 4 types of different problems once we break it down. So let's look at bread as an example of another simple system, right? Over here, let's start at the bottom right-hand corner. If I ask you, how would you bake bread for the first time? You'll say, oh, I go on the YouTube, I research or Google some recipe, and then I buy the ingredients and I try it out. And then the next time I will adjust for ingredients or my oven temperature. This is a clear problem where you say, I've seen this done many times before, or I've done it myself many times before. This is a best practice. If I ask you, now make me a 12-course meal for 10 people, including bread, what will you do? You might have to design the menu and then collect the ingredients, and there are more steps to it, right? But more steps, you'll take a little bit more time, maybe more planning. But in essence, you know that if you follow the steps, you'll more or less get the same kind of outcome. And this is the expert domain. I don't know how, but I know what and who to ask. If I tell you, how would you prevent potential family fights from breaking out because someone is gluten intolerant and doesn't eat your bread? This is an example of no one can agree and I don't know what to ask. And actually, the best scenario for this is everyone brings their own dish, a potluck that's suited for your own dietary restrictions. And finally, what happens when your oven catches fire and your whole kitchen is burning down? What do? They're like, oh, I try to put out the fire. I call 995. I alert the neighbors. I evacuate everyone. And then after that, I look to see if I've got my housing insurance. This is chaotic situation. I've got to stop it. It's in the realm of novel practice. And we've been through a lot of this in recent years with pandemics and also natural disasters. These are 4 different kinds of problem sets. And different problems require different approaches, right? So no, design thinking is not really needed for everything. It can appear in some of the complicated domains, especially in the information architecture kind of field, right? But I would primarily use the adaptive leadership skills that design thinking teaches us to actually solve boundary problems. So what are these adaptive leadership skills in the complex area? How you hold conversations, how you hold the space and create a safe space for different points of view and perspectives to come up. And how do you design for experimentation by using prototyping skills and design for collective action by bringing everyone to the table? So design thinking is not in it by itself, just headed towards the final product or design, but really using it to hold space, to plan and tap for emergence for complex problems. So my principle number 2 is the complex space we co-opt, we don't control, because control is an illusion for complex problems. We can only co-opt for many different perspectives to find out what we don't know. So in other words, the unknown unknowns. When we use principle 1, which is purpose, and 2 together, this is what can happen, right? I ask people, okay, so how do we design for anti-corruption in Singapore? Singapore has been consistently rated as the least corrupt country, one of the least corrupt countries in the world. And the answer comes about something like this. It is a whole plethora of actions that we take. It doesn't just fall into one agency's purview. It's actually done across the board, from HR policies to procurement policies, declaration of gifts, channels like whistleblowing, and very importantly, zero tolerance paradigm and culture, right? So my point is that if we are beating up a client or an organization for not being able to use design thinking or not wanting to use design thinking, I'm here telling you a system does exactly what it's designed to do. It's got its purpose, it's got all its stock and flows, and it's got the interconnection between it. And when we design those carefully, intentionally, and deliberately, it will do what we want it to do. So back to this. What happened to my almost quitting experience when I was in the Land Transport Authority? My boss back then, he was an old timer in the organization, knows it very well. I think he could sense that I was getting really deflated. And he called me in for a pretext of a chat. And he said, Agnes, great breath of fresh air, so much energy, such great ideas. And I said, but what? Just cut to it. I want to know, but. And he goes, but your problem is that none of the senior management trusts you. And I went, oh. I was actually relieved to hear it, because in one very concise sentence, he summed up the problem that I was having, that I couldn't even see for myself. So I went back to my team and I said, guys, new design challenge, right? It's not about trains or buses. How do we design for the management to trust Agnes? And they came up with great ideas, actually. Out of the 17 really large groups that were in this organization that had 7,000 engineers, they broke it down for me and said, these are the people that we should talk to first. This is what we should ask them about. This is how we go about to sense what are the challenges and the issues. Let's just start by understanding our stakeholders first. So we did that. And fast forward, we then were able to state a purpose to unite the whole organization, which is to make public transport as desirable as private cars. And the stated purpose, why, was because Landstar Singapore needs an emotive pool for public transport, aside from being low cost and being convenient. So this was our pragmatic, existential, but hopefully bold statement, right? As desirable as cars. It was a moonshot, but nevertheless, a point in the ambitions that we wanted to go. And over there, that picture of the two adorable girls that you see there were my daughters. They were 5 and 6 back at that time. They are teenagers now, 15 and 16, not quite as adorable, but still as lovely. And I had them involved in the Christmas-themed train experiment as a prototype that we ran. Lovable public transport looked like. So we took just one cabin in a train and we did a Christmas theme with it. 10 years on, and this is the most recent Chinese New Year in 2024, theme trains are now part of Singapore's festival celebrations for all the festivals, right? The guy with the red arrow that you see there, he's a Minister of Transport launching the 2026 Chinese New Year train. Incidentally, when I did the Christmas train in 2015, he was one of my colleagues. I received a flurry of messages saying, Minister is talking about you, saying how Agnes Kwek launched these trains 10 years ago. So for some reason, it is still going on. The second thing that we did was this Punggol Coast MRT station. It's Singapore's first station by design thinking, right? And what you can see there, if I remove this, is actually a paradigm shift. Now, this looks more like a shopping mall, but it is a MRT station. The key paradigm shift was this, is that Punggol Coast was in a really unique location in between a digital district for our digital companies, a university, residents, and also a big park. So it's set at the nexus of all of this. So our designers were thinking, what if we didn't design a station for flow, for the station design for flow, which is to get as many people in and out as quickly as possible. What if we designed to invite people to stay since it is part of the community nexus? Now, even this paradigm shift had lots of problems with it. Because as you might imagine, the security guys didn't really like this idea. But if we design for people to stay, then what about terrorist attack? The fire guys didn't like this idea. Oh, what if there's a fire? So in order to do that, we had to co-opt hundreds of different stakeholders. And what we can see over there, that's an artist's impression. But very quickly, I want to show you what it's actually like once it has been launched. So this is the real Punggol Coast after it is operational. So there you saw Starship Troopers. I guess they were doing a Star Wars sort of a day. It might have been May the 4th. That was right in the station, just randomly there, inviting people to come and take photos of them. You saw the seats and you saw the security guys walking past. And basically, I was really happy to see how the vision was realized. So 12 years on, these were recent photos where they're looking to redesign an underground passageway. And they put up all of these posters asking people for ideas. What do you do in this space? They were actually holding workshops in this space to get stakeholder feedback, commuter feedback. And now project teams go through compulsory design thinking training and with online coaching after that. So what changed back then that made this happen, other than the pep talk by my boss? Did the leadership change? Did I get more budget? Was there ministerial pressure? What changed? Actually, none of those above changed. I changed. And this is how I changed, right? I learned to treat others' goals as important as mine. I learned to practice unconditional positive regard, which is a tool that psychology use. I learned to move with those most willing to move with me first, and then try many things, and that recognizing that I will fail at most of them. So this gentleman that you see over there, that's Paul. And he was in charge of 600 engineers that designed everything in Singapore, all the transport infrastructure. When I first went to him with design thinking, he sat back and he looked at me with his arms folded like that. What do you want? But somehow, when I started talking to him, not from say, you should use design thinking or you must use design thinking, but really to understand, hey, Paul, what's bugging you most, right? What is it that you want to achieve? And he said, I just need my engineers to see things differently. I'm like, what do you mean? Now they see themselves as designing concrete beams and structure and monuments, right? But I want them to think about designing for people first. So I went, oh, so you mean from monuments to moments that matter? She went, yes, that is it. And when you see it, when someone's eyes light up at you, you know you've got them. So we started moving on those projects together. And then that's where you saw the first station by design thinking. So my third principle is actually my most important one, which is your own behaviors create the outcomes. So here are just 3 quick principles to summarize. Purpose drives a system, co-opt, not control, and behaviors create an outcome. And in complex systems, I think designers are very wedded to our own ideas, right? Thought that you can control an outcome is actually an illusion. So what I'd rather do is to focus on how we learn and experiment. To leave you with something more geeky, as designers, if we're thinking about designing a complex future, I will always start off with this exam question. What challenges and opportunities lie in the future of whatever, and what does success look like? What solutions are needed and who holds the keys? And there are actually 7 questions that falls into 3 key buckets of skills. The first is future, right? What forces will shape our environment X years from now? The further you go, the better. Systems. What are the current goals of the systems and how are they reinforced? Then humans. What are people experiencing today? How can they better support it? But what I'm most interested about is the questions at the intersection of these circles. which is about future experiences, emergent behaviors, and designing for collective action. And in short, these are three key skills that I feel we need for the age of complexity: futures thinking, systems thinking, and design thinking. But never one or the other at the same time, but always a combination of three. And at the heart of it lies purpose. So that summarizes my presentation, and I would love to hear your questions. But first, I also want to do a call out for volunteers needed. If you're running an academic institute, a design innovation lab, I am looking for volunteers to host me to run a 1-day systems thinking workshop, preferably within Europe. I'm trying to not go too far out of my orbit. And the objective is that I have developed a digital game that actually simulates a complex dynamic environment in which, through this experience, you will learn what complexity means and then what are the three principles of systems thinking. I'm looking to prototype this digital game with a group, but also to test a full day workshop flow in which the experience will be the three principles of systems thinking, but activities, case studies, and also my own bespoke tools that we will apply to a problem on the spot. And of course, a digital game testing. And then psychological approaches to build mental and emotional resilience to deal with complexity, ending off in peer-to-peer coaching. The target audience I'm looking for are master's level students or working professionals. Some level of work experience is necessary for this. Minimum 20 people, maximum 34. And these are some of my available dates. But if you think that you're interested in this, please email me at the email below. And it just leaves me to wish all of you, since this is the second day of Chinese New Year, lots of health, prosperity, and joy in the year of the fire horse. So if you're interested to read more about my writing in systems thinking and complexity, that is my blog over there, a QR code. Please do subscribe. And by any means, contact me over email. I'd love to hear more from you. So thank you very much for listening. And over to you, Yuli, for questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Agnes. That was really powerful, a very powerful talk. So please, big hand of applause for Agnes. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
There are already several questions in the chat here. Luca was asking if you think that changing a system is possible from the outside of the system. So you have experienced both. You have been inside the system and starting to change. Now you are somehow outside of the system.
Yeah. My quick answer is that you need both, right? And being on both sides, I can tell you the pros and cons to it. Now, when I'm outside and I go into an organization and say, you should do this, sounds like common sense. And you're like, yeah, you're right. And then later, someone on inside say, thank you for saying that. That's what we've been trying to say for a really long time. And it's just how things work, that voices from outside tend to be more valued somehow, right? Or it just sounds different. What I really truly miss is actually being able to change things from the inside, because you get a sense of the details, the level of operational details, the personalities involved, the culture. That only comes from being involved day to day in the operational basis. Then you kind of know, where do you need to unpick first? So what I've done actually for some organizations is do a hybrid. I am an in-house consultant and I come in at strategic moments, but throughout the year, I engage with the teams quite regularly just to get a sense of what's going on. So keep the pulse, keep your finger on the pulse, but come in from a voice of the outside.
Thank you. There's another question from Charo. That's a question about the term. There's the question is, do you think if design thinking is a helpful term, or is it a barrier to communication, to communicate the concepts, methods, and value? We had that discussion when we started the D School 18 years ago. I had the discussion with the guys at Stanford. We were discussing about design thinking as a term, and we didn't find a proper German term. So we stayed with design thinking, and we were constantly debating about that. So what is your opinion on that?
Well, a rose by any other name smells as sweet or smelly. I think that debating about the term itself is not quite productive. But I think that we as design thinkers need to show up in how we drive, how we engage with stakeholders, and how we think strategically about projects. It's true that somehow the term design thinking has gotten a bit commercialized over the years. And it's kind of like a victim of its own success if you think about it. So you say design thinking, everyone goes, oh yeah, double diamond, I know about that. But with any other tool or philosophy, there is a lot of scope for us to evolve what it means, how it's being used, how we talk about it. So I hope that this community can be the start of doing that, to say, hey guys, it's not just about double diamond. Hey guys, it's not just about the end user experience. We're really interested in your operational experience too, interested in the futures of this. And here's how we see it combining with the future, the systems, and the user and the human experience point of view. And I do believe in my engagements with the design thinking community that we have come a long way. We are talking about these things, but maybe not quite enough, not loudly enough, or we haven't quite made it as simple to understand as the double diamond. I love a good, simple framework. So, how do we start to talk about it differently?
I think there's actually a good call for GDTA to talk louder than we're talking right now. We have to raise our voice. Any other questions, Agnes? I was really blown away by one thing you were talking about, which is how you renovated the tax system in Singapore already years ago. This is what I'm wishing so intensively here. Do you know of any other state following your example and making tax?
Honestly, I don't. I haven't researched it, but if any of you do, or if anyone wants to call up, please do it in the chat. But that point, thank you for pointing that out, because that goes back to the previous question, right? So we call it design thinking. In 1991, the IRAS did not think of what it was doing as design thinking, but it's essentially there, right? So I think that how it comes across, how it's being implemented and followed through is so much more important. So someone said, check tech system, Estonia. Yes, thank you for
Yeah.
that. Estonia is also known for a very powerful e-government.
Yeah.
Sweden as well. Okay, so Estonia, Sweden, and Singapore, that's where you should be. Those are the real tax haven guys.
We'll have a look. We'll point our government to those countries and also to yourself. So thanks a lot. Time is over. Thanks so much, Agnes, for your time and for sharing your thoughts and your kind of pushing the design thinking community to new borders, and actually also pushing the GDTA to speak out louder. And we are trying to do that. So I just want to announce next Spotlight session in March will be happening on the 24th of March. And we have Samuel Zschäpe from Potsdam, HBI Potsdam, talking about his latest findings, the latest white paper about AI and design thinking. You can find it on LinkedIn. He was publishing it a few days ago, and he's willing to share his ideas and to discuss this with the global design thinking community. I also want to point on our global design thinking conference, our annual conference, end of September 29 and 30 in Coimbatore in India. So please put this in the calendar and look at our website, gdta.org. You'll find pretty soon some more information about that. And thanks to Raika for preparing everything here, setting it up. And again, a big thank you to Agnes and to all of you around the planet.
Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. And please get in touch. I would love to continue this conversation with you. Thank you, Yuli, for the wonderful invite.
Bye-bye.
Bye.